Maya Rodriguez had always been the kind of student who preferred the shadows to the spotlight, moving through life with the careful precision of someone who had learned early that invisibility was often the safest path. At 17, she navigated the sprawling corridors of Riverside High School like a ghost, her slight frame and reserved demeanor making her practically invisible to most of her classmates. Standing barely 5 feet 2 inches tall and weighing no more than 110 pounds, Maya kept her dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail that revealed delicate features and intelligent brown eyes that seemed to absorb everything while revealing nothing. Her skin held the warm olive tone of her Mexican heritage, inherited from her grandmother who had crossed the border decades ago with nothing but determination and dreams of a better life. Maya's features were refined and symmetrical, with high cheekbones that spoke to her indigenous ancestry and full lips that rarely curved into a smile these days. Her hands were small but surprisingly strong, with calluses hidden beneath the sleeves of her oversized sweaters that told the story of years of training that no one at this school could imagine. She wore oversized sweaters that seemed to swallow her petite figure, the fabric hanging loose around her shoulders and arms in a way that completely disguised the lean muscle beneath. Her jeans were always loose-fitting, paired with worn sneakers that had seen better days, carrying her books clutched tightly against her chest like a shield against the world. The clothes were deliberate choices, designed to make her appear even smaller and less threatening than she already was. A camouflage that allowed her to move through the halls without drawing attention to herself. What her classmates didn't know, what none of them could have guessed from her quiet exterior, was that Maya had spent the last 8 years training in mixed martial arts at her uncle's gym in San Diego. The gym, located in a converted warehouse in a rough neighborhood where the sound of police sirens was as common as birdsong, had become her second home from the age of 9. The building itself was unremarkable from the outside, with peeling paint and barred windows that did nothing to hint at the transformation that occurred within its walls. Under the tutelage of Ricardo Rodriguez, a former UFC fighter who had earned his reputation in the octagon before a career-ending injury forced him into retirement, Maya had earned a black belt in karate, become proficient in Brazilian jiu-jitsu, and developed skills in Muay Thai kickboxing that would have impressed even professional fighters. Her uncle, a man who understood the responsibility that came with deadly knowledge, had taught her that true strength came from discipline and control, not from seeking fights or showing off. Ricardo stood 6 feet tall with the weathered face of a man who had seen too much violence in his 35 years. His hands bore the scars of countless battles, knuckles permanently swollen from years of hitting heavy bags and harder opponents. A jagged scar ran from his left temple to his jaw, a souvenir from the fight that had ended his professional career when an opponent's elbow had opened up his face and damaged his orbital bone beyond complete repair. But despite his intimidating appearance, Ricardo possessed a gentle soul and an unwavering moral compass that he had passed down to his niece. The gym itself was a temple of discipline and respect, where students learned not just to fight, but to understand the weight of their capabilities. The walls were lined with heavy bags that had absorbed thousands of hours of punishment, their leather surfaces worn smooth by countless fists and feet. Speed bags hung from reinforced ceiling mounts, creating a rhythmic percussion that served as the heartbeat of the space. Wrestling mats covered most of the floor, their blue surface marked with the sweat stains of countless training sessions, and marked with tape to designate different training areas. Maya's training had begun as a way to channel her energy and build confidence after she had been targeted by bullies at her elementary school. Her uncle had noticed her withdrawn behavior during a family gathering and had immediately recognized the signs of someone who felt powerless in their own life. He had offered to teach her some basic self-defense, never imagining that his young niece would display such natural talent and dedication to the martial arts. From her very first lesson, Maya had shown an intuitive understanding of balance and movement that amazed her uncle. Where other children her age struggled with basic coordination, Maya moved with a fluid grace that seemed almost supernatural. Her small size, which had made her a target for bullies, proved to be an advantage in martial arts training, allowing her to develop speed and agility that larger opponents couldn't match. Over the years, Ricardo had drilled into her the importance of restraint, the necessity of using her skills only when absolutely necessary, and the moral obligation to never become the aggressor. He had made her memorize the tenets of responsible martial arts practice, reciting them before every training session until they became as natural as breathing. "Martial arts is not about being able to hurt others," he would say, his voice heavy with the weight of experience. "It's about being able to protect yourself and others when there is no other choice. The moment you use your skills for anything else, you become the very thing we train to defend against." Maya's training regimen had been exhaustive and comprehensive, designed to create not just a fighter, but a disciplined individual who understood the true meaning of power. Monday through Friday, she would arrive at the gym directly after school, changing into her GI or training clothes in the small locker room that smelled of sweat and determination. Her uncle would begin each session with meditation, teaching her to center her mind and control her emotions before engaging in any physical activity. The meditation sessions were perhaps the most important part of her training, though Maya hadn't understood their significance until years later. Sitting cross-legged on the mat, focusing on her breathing while her uncle spoke quietly about the philosophy of martial arts, she learned to separate her emotions from her actions. She learned that anger was a weakness that could be exploited by opponents, that fear was natural but could be overcome through preparation, and that true strength came from the ability to remain calm under pressure. After meditation came the physical training, which began with an hour of conditioning that would have challenged adult athletes. Push-ups, sit-ups, jumping jacks, and running were just the beginning. Ricardo had created obstacle courses using tires, ropes, and wooden barriers that forced Maya to develop not just strength, but also agility, coordination, and mental toughness. She learned to fall properly, rolling with impacts instead of fighting them, a skill that would prove invaluable in both training and real-world situations. The technical instruction that followed was where Maya truly excelled. In karate, she learned the precise blocks, strikes, and kicks that formed the foundation of her fighting ability. Each movement was practiced thousands of times until it became automatic, until her body could execute perfect technique without conscious thought. Her uncle was a perfectionist who accepted nothing less than absolute precision, correcting her form with infinite patience until every movement was flawless. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu introduced her to ground fighting and the art of using leverage and technique to overcome larger, stronger opponents. On the mats, Maya learned that size meant nothing if you understood how to use your opponent's weight against them. She practiced escapes from holds that would have seemed impossible to break, learning to flow like water around obstacles that seemed immovable. The chess-like mental aspect of jiu-jitsu appealed to her analytical mind, and she quickly became proficient at setting up complex submission holds that could end fights in seconds. Muay Thai kickboxing added the brutal efficiency of elbow and knee strikes to her arsenal, along with the devastating leg kicks that could cripple an opponent's mobility in moments. The training was punishing, with Maya learning to absorb punishment as well as dish it out. Her shins became conditioned through countless hours of kicking heavy bags and wooden posts, developing the bone density that would allow her to deliver crushing blows without injuring herself. Perhaps most importantly, Ricardo taught Maya about the legal and moral implications of her training. She learned about the concept of proportional response, understanding that using deadly force against a non-deadly threat could result in criminal charges, even if she was technically defending herself. She studied real-world scenarios and learned to assess threats quickly and accurately, determining the minimum level of force necessary to neutralize a situation without causing unnecessary harm. The psychological training was equally important, as Ricardo helped Maya understand the responsibility that came with her abilities. He shared stories from his own fighting career, both in the ring and on the streets, explaining how easy it was for someone with martial arts training to seriously injure or even kill an untrained opponent. He made her promise that she would never use her skills for revenge, never start a fight, and never use more force than was absolutely necessary to protect herself or others. As Maya grew older and more skilled, her uncle began incorporating weapons training into her education. She learned to use and defend against knives, sticks, and improvised weapons, understanding that real-world conflicts often involved more than just empty hands. But with each new skill came additional responsibility, and Ricardo constantly reinforced the importance of restraint and good judgment. The bullying started during her second week at Riverside High School, a sprawling complex of red brick buildings that housed nearly 3,000 students from across the city. The school had been built in the 1970s and showed its age in countless small ways, from the flickering fluorescent lights in the hallways to the cracked linoleum floors that had been patched and repatched over the decades. The building was a maze of corridors and staircases that connected 4 separate wings, creating countless alcoves and blind corners where bullies could corner their victims away from adult supervision. Maya's family had moved from San Diego after her father's job transfer brought them to this mid-sized Illinois town, and she found herself navigating the complex social hierarchy of a new school where everyone seemed to have already formed their cliques and alliances. The transition from her old school, where she had been just another face in the crowd, to this new environment where she stood out as an outsider, had been jarring and uncomfortable. Her father, Miguel Rodriguez, worked as a software engineer for a technology company that had recently expanded into the Midwest. The job transfer had come with a significant promotion and salary increase, but it meant leaving behind the extended family and community that had been Maya's support system for her entire life. Her mother, Elena, had been reluctant to leave California, where her own mother and sisters still lived, but the financial opportunities had been too good to pass up. The house they moved into was larger and nicer than their previous home in San Diego, a 3-bedroom colonial in a quiet suburban neighborhood where the lawns were perfectly manicured and the houses all looked like they belonged in a magazine. But despite the material improvements, Maya felt isolated and homesick, missing the warmth and chaos of her extended family and the familiar sounds and smells of her uncle's gym. The culture shock of moving from California to Illinois had been more significant than Maya had anticipated. The pace of life was different, slower in some ways, but also more rigid in others. The students at Riverside High School seemed to dress differently, talk differently, and have different interests than the kids she had known in San Diego. She found herself constantly second-guessing her behavior, wondering if she was saying the wrong thing or standing out in ways that would make her a target. The leader of her tormentors was Jessica Walsh, a popular senior with shoulder-length blonde hair and a cruel smile who ruled the school's social scene with an iron fist. At 18, Jessica stood nearly 6 feet tall, her athletic build a testament to her years on the volleyball team, and she carried herself with the confidence of someone who had never faced real consequences for her actions. Her height made her an imposing figure, especially when confronting someone as small as Maya, and she had learned to use her physical presence as a tool of intimidation. Jessica came from a wealthy family that had lived in the town for generations, her father owning several successful businesses and her mother serving on the school board. This family connection gave her a sense of immunity from consequences that had been reinforced throughout her high school career, Teachers were reluctant to discipline her too harshly, knowing that her parents could make their lives difficult, and administrators often looked the other way when complaints were made about her behavior. Her appearance was carefully cultivated to project an image of perfection that masked the cruelty beneath. Her blonde hair was always perfectly styled, whether worn loose around her shoulders or pulled back in an elaborate braid that must have taken an hour to create. Her makeup was flawless, applied with the skill of someone who had been practicing since middle school, and her clothes were always designer brands that cost more than most families spent on groceries in a month. But beneath the perfect exterior lay a deeply insecure individual who maintained her social status through fear and intimidation. Jessica had learned early that being cruel to others made her feel powerful and in control, and she had spent years perfecting the art of psychological torture. She had an instinctive ability to identify the insecurities of others and exploit them mercilessly, turning teenage awkwardness into weapons that could destroy self-esteem with surgical precision. Her two loyal followers, Madison Brooks and Ashley Cooper, were always ready to laugh at her jokes and participate in whatever scheme she devised. Madison, a red-haired junior with freckles and a wicked sense of humor, had earned her place in Jessica's inner circle through her ability to craft cutting insults that could reduce other students to tears. Her intelligence, which could have been used for positive purposes, was instead channeled into creating elaborate schemes to humiliate their victims. Madison's family was middle class, and she had initially befriended Jessica out of a desire to access the privileges that came with wealth and social status. Over time, however, she had discovered that she genuinely enjoyed the process of tormenting others, finding a dark satisfaction in watching her carefully crafted insults land with devastating effect. Her freckled face could transform from innocent and cheerful to cruel and calculating in an instant, a duality that allowed her to maintain plausible deniability when confronted by adults. Ashley Cooper, a brunette sophomore who desperately wanted to fit in with the older girls, was always eager to prove herself by taking Jessica's cruelty to new levels. At 15, she was the youngest member of the group and felt constant pressure to demonstrate her worthiness to remain in their circle. This desperation made her unpredictable and often caused her to escalate situations beyond what Jessica had originally planned. Ashley came from a broken home where her parents were going through a messy divorce, and the chaos in her personal life had left her hungry for stability and belonging. Finding acceptance with Jessica and Madison had given her a sense of family that she couldn't find at home, and she was willing to do almost anything to maintain her place in the group. Her need for approval often led her to suggest increasingly cruel pranks and schemes, always trying to impress the older girls with her creativity and willingness to cross lines. They had identified Maya as an easy target from day one, someone who wouldn't fight back and whose quiet nature made her the perfect victim for their entertainment. It was Madison who first noticed Maya sitting alone in the cafeteria, methodically eating her lunch while reading a worn paperback novel. The book was a fantasy novel that Maya had read multiple times, its familiar story providing comfort in an unfamiliar environment. She had always been an avid reader, finding solace in the worlds created by authors who understood that sometimes reality was too harsh to bear without escape. It was Ashley who pointed out how Maya's clothes looked like they came from a thrift store, noting with cruel satisfaction how the new girl seemed to shrink into herself whenever anyone looked in her direction. The observation was partially accurate, as Maya's family had always been frugal with clothing expenses, preferring to spend money on experiences and education rather than fashion. But Ashley's comment revealed more about her own insecurities than about Maya's financial situation, as the younger girl had learned to judge others based on material possessions as a way of establishing her own worth. And it was Jessica who decided that Maya would become their new plaything, a decision that would prove to be one of the worst mistakes of her life. The choice was made with the casual cruelty of someone who had never considered the humanity of their victims, treating Maya like an object to be used for entertainment rather than a person with feelings and dignity. Jessica's decision was influenced by several factors. Maya's small size made her seem like a safe target. Her status as a new student meant she had no established friendships to protect her, and her quiet demeanor suggested she wouldn't fight back or report the harassment. It began with small things that seemed almost accidental to casual observers. Jessica would bump into Maya in the hallway, causing her to drop her books and scramble to collect them, while other students stepped over the scattered papers without a second glance. The collision would appear unintentional, just another moment of clumsiness in the crowded halls, but Maya could see the satisfaction in Jessica's eyes as she watched her gather her belongings. The first incident occurred on a Thursday morning when Maya was rushing to her second period chemistry class. She had stopped at her locker to retrieve her textbook and was hurrying down the crowded hallway when Jessica stepped directly into her path. The collision sent Maya's books flying across the floor, papers scattering like leaves in a windstorm. As Maya knelt to collect her belongings, she could hear Jessica's fake apology, delivered in a voice loud enough for nearby students to hear. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry!" Jessica exclaimed, her voice dripping with false concern. "I didn't see you there. You're so small, I guess you just blend into the background." The comment drew snickers from passing students, and Maya felt her face burn with embarrassment as she scrambled to collect her scattered papers. Jessica made no effort to help, instead standing over Maya with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, enjoying the spectacle of the new girl on her hands and knees, picking up her belongings. Madison would make snide comments about Maya's clothes when she thought no one was listening, whispering to Ashley about how the new girl dressed like she shopped at thrift stores and couldn't afford anything decent. Her voice would carry just far enough for Maya to hear, each word carefully chosen to inflict maximum damage to her already fragile self-esteem. The comments were delivered with the kind of casual cruelty that teenagers had perfected, designed to sound like innocent observations while cutting deeply into their target's confidence. "Look at those jeans," Madison would whisper to Ashley as Maya passed by their table in the cafeteria. "I swear I saw them in the clearance bin at Walmart last week. And that sweater looks like something my grandmother would donate to charity." The comments were always just loud enough for Maya to hear, but quiet enough that they could claim innocence if confronted by a teacher or administrator. Ashley, not to be outdone by her companions, would knock Maya's backpack off her shoulder as she passed, watching with satisfaction as the shy girl bent down to gather her belongings yet again. Sometimes she would time it perfectly so that Maya's books would scatter across the floor just as the hallway filled with students rushing to their next class, creating chaos and embarrassment that seemed to fuel Ashley's cruel satisfaction. The backpack incidents became increasingly frequent and deliberate, with Ashley developing a technique that looked accidental but was actually carefully calculated. She would approach Maya from behind in crowded hallways, then bump into her with just enough force to knock the backpack from her shoulder while making it appear like an accident caused by the press of students. The timing was always perfect, occurring just as the halls filled with students changing classes, ensuring maximum embarrassment and disruption. Maya endured these incidents silently, reminding herself of her uncle's teachings about avoiding unnecessary conflicts and not using her skills unless absolutely necessary. Each time she bent to collect her scattered belongings, she could hear Ricardo's voice in her head, reminding her that a true martial artist never sought out conflict and always looked for peaceful solutions to problems. The internal conflict between her desire to defend herself and her commitment to her uncle's teachings created a constant tension that grew stronger with each passing day. The harassment escalated over the following weeks, becoming more frequent and more creative as the trio grew bolder. During lunch, Jessica would lead her friends to Maya's table, where she sat alone reading a book, and make loud comments about how pathetic it was that some people had no friends. They would laugh as they walked away, their voices carrying across the cafeteria and drawing stares from other students who were grateful not to be the target themselves. "Look at little Maya, all alone with her book," Jessica would announce loudly as she approached Maya's table with Madison and Ashley in tow. "Don't you think it's sad when someone is so weird that they can't make any friends? I mean, we've been in school for weeks now, and she's still eating lunch by herself. Maybe if she tried to fit in instead of acting like she's too good for everyone else, people might actually want to talk to her." The comments were designed to be heard by the entire cafeteria, and Jessica would pause dramatically between each observation to ensure her words had maximum impact. Maya would continue reading, her face burning with shame, while the words on the page blurred together as tears threatened to spill from her eyes. The familiar characters and plot lines that had once provided comfort now seemed distant and unreal, unable to provide escape from the harsh reality of her situation. Other students in the cafeteria would turn to watch the spectacle, some looking uncomfortable with the obvious bullying, but unwilling to intervene. A few would whisper among themselves, expressing sympathy for Maya, but lacking the courage to stand up to Jessica and her followers. The bystander effect was in full display, with dozens of witnesses who could have stopped the harassment simply by speaking up, but who instead chose to protect themselves by remaining silent. In the gym, Madison would accidentally spike volleyballs directly at Maya's head during PE class, apologizing with fake sincerity while Jessica and Ashley giggled behind their hands. The force of the impact would leave Maya dizzy and disoriented. But when she complained to the teacher, Madison would claim it was an accident and point to her spotless record as evidence of her good intentions. The volleyball incidents were particularly dangerous, as Madison had years of experience on the school team and could generate significant force with her spikes. She would position herself strategically during practice games, waiting for the perfect moment to send the ball rocketing toward Maya's head with precision that belied her claims of accident. The impacts were painful and disorienting, often leaving Maya with headaches that lasted for hours after PE class ended. Coach Patterson, a middle-aged woman who had been teaching physical education for over 20 years, was overwhelmed by the chaos of trying to manage 30 teenagers in a gymnasium and often missed the subtle signs of intentional targeting. When Maya complained about the frequency of accidents involving Madison's spikes, the coach would remind her that volleyball was a fast-paced sport where collisions and mishaps were common, never recognizing the pattern that was developing. The teacher, overwhelmed by the chaos of trying to manage 30 teenagers in a gymnasium, would accept Madison's explanation and move on, leaving Maya to nurse her bruises in silence. The complicity of adults who should have been protecting her added another layer of frustration and despair to Maya's situation, making her feel even more isolated and helpless. The locker room became another battleground where Ashley would hide Maya's clothes while she showered, forcing her to search frantically before the next class period. Sometimes she would move them to a different locker. Sometimes she would stuff them in the trash, and once she even threw them into the pool, forcing Maya to fish them out while other students watched and laughed. The clothes-hiding incidents were perhaps the most humiliating aspect of the harassment, as they left Maya vulnerable and exposed in a way that felt particularly violating. Ashley had discovered that Maya always hung her clothes in the same general area of the locker room and would wait until the showers started running before making her move. The other girls in the locker room would either participate in the laughter or pretend not to notice, creating an atmosphere of complicity that made Maya feel completely alone. The incident with the pool occurred on a particularly cold October day when Maya had been looking forward to the warmth of the shower after an exhausting PE class. She emerged from the shower stall to find her clothes missing and spent several frantic minutes searching the locker room before another student pointed toward the pool area. Maya found her clothes floating in the chlorinated water, waterlogged and ruined, forcing her to put on the damp garments and endure the rest of the school day in uncomfortable, soaking wet clothes. The humiliation was deliberate and systematic, designed to wear down Maya's resistance and establish the clear hierarchy that Jessica demanded. Each incident was carefully calculated to cause maximum embarrassment while maintaining plausible deniability, allowing the perpetrators to claim innocence if confronted by authority figures. The psychological impact was cumulative, with each new humiliation building on the previous ones to create a constant state of anxiety and dread. Maya's inner turmoil grew with each passing day, a constant battle between her desire for peace and her growing anger at the injustice of her situation. She knew she could end this harassment instantly, could show these girls exactly what she was capable of, but her uncle's voice echoed in her mind constantly. He had taught her that martial arts were for protection and self-defense, not for settling scores or proving points. The internal conflict was exhausting, requiring constant mental effort to suppress her natural instincts and maintain her composure. Maya had been trained to recognize and respond to threats quickly and decisively, but her uncle's teachings about restraint and proportional response created a psychological barrier that prevented her from taking action. She found herself analyzing each incident, trying to determine whether it constituted a genuine threat that justified a physical response, but always concluding that the harassment, while cruel, didn't rise to the level that would justify using her martial arts training. She remembered the hours they had spent discussing the responsibility that came with her training, how she must never be the aggressor, and how violence should always be the last resort. Her uncle had made her promise that she would never use her skills to hurt someone unless her life was truly in danger, and Maya took that promise seriously, even as her tormentors made her life increasingly miserable. The conversations with her uncle about the ethical use of martial arts had been extensive and profound, covering not just the physical techniques, but the moral philosophy that should guide their application. Ricardo had shared stories from his own youth, when he had been quick to use his fists to solve problems, and the consequences that had followed. He had spent time in juvenile detention after a fight that had left another teenager hospitalized, and the experience had taught him that physical power without moral restraint was a path to destruction. Power without responsibility is just violence, Ricardo had told her during one particularly intense training session, and violence without purpose is just cruelty. You have to understand that every technique I teach you, every skill you develop, comes with the obligation to use it wisely. The moment you start using your abilities to hurt others instead of protecting yourself, you become the very thing we train to defend against. The emotional toll of the constant harassment began to affect every aspect of Maya's life. She found herself dreading each school day, lying awake at night imagining what new humiliation awaited her. Her grades began to suffer as she struggled to concentrate on her studies while constantly watching for the next attack. She stopped eating lunch in the cafeteria, instead hiding in the library where she could find some peace among the books. The library became her sanctuary, a quiet refuge where the smell of old books and the gentle hum of fluorescent lights provided a peaceful contrast to the chaos of the hallways. Mrs. Henderson, the school librarian, was a kind woman in her 60s who had noticed Maya's frequent visits and made a point of recommending books that might provide comfort and escape. The older woman seemed to sense that Maya was struggling with something, but respected her privacy enough not to pry. Maya's parents noticed the change in her behavior, but attributed it to the stress of adjusting to a new school. never suspecting the systematic torture their daughter endured on a daily basis. Miguel and Elena Rodriguez were loving parents who worked hard to provide for their family. But like many adults, they underestimated the cruelty that teenagers could inflict on each other. When Maya's grades began to slip and her demeanor became increasingly withdrawn, they assumed it was a normal part of adolescent adjustment to a new environment. The dinner conversations at the Rodriguez household became strained as Maya struggled to maintain a facade of normalcy while dealing with the constant stress of school harassment. Her parents would ask about her day, and Maya would provide vague, non-committal answers that revealed nothing about her actual experiences. She had learned to deflect their questions with generic responses about homework and teachers, never mentioning the daily humiliations that were slowly destroying her self-esteem. Maya's relationship with her parents had always been close, built on trust and open communication, but the harassment at school created a barrier that she couldn't bring herself to cross. She was ashamed of being victimized, feeling somehow responsible for the treatment she was receiving, and she didn't want to worry her parents with problems she felt she should be able to handle herself. The isolation this created only added to her emotional burden, cutting her off from the very people who could have provided support and advocacy. The situation reached a breaking point on a Tuesday morning in late October, when the autumn air carried a chill that matched the coldness in Maya's heart. She was walking to her locker between classes when she noticed Jessica, Madison, and Ashley approaching from the opposite direction, their expressions predatory and eager. The hallway was crowded with students heading to their next period, creating the perfect audience for whatever humiliation the trio had planned. The morning had started badly for Maya, with her alarm clock failing to go off and forcing her to rush through her morning routine. She had skipped breakfast and arrived at school just as the first bell rang, feeling off balance and vulnerable in a way that seemed to attract predators. Her hair wasn't properly arranged, and she had forgotten to bring the fantasy novel that had become her constant companion during lunch periods. Maya tried to keep her head down and walk past them, but Jessica stepped directly into her path, forcing her to stop. The collision was deliberate, calculated, and unmistakably hostile. The taller girl's body blocked Maya's escape route completely, and the predatory smile on her face made it clear that this confrontation was going to be different from the previous incidents. The other students began to slow down, sensing that something was about to happen and not wanting to miss the show. Maya could feel their eyes on her, could hear the whispered comments and excited murmurs as word spread that something was about to go down. She felt trapped, cornered like a wild animal with nowhere to run, her heart pounding so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. The crowd that was gathering had the hungry energy of spectators at a gladiatorial combat, drawn by the promise of witnessing someone else's humiliation. Many of the students had phones already in their hands, anticipating the opportunity to capture and share whatever was about to happen. The social media age had turned teenage cruelty into entertainment, with viral videos and shared humiliation becoming currency in the economy of adolescent social status. "Well, well, well," Jessica said loudly, her voice carrying across the hallway with the confidence of someone who had never faced real consequences for her actions. "If it isn't little Maya, scurrying through the halls like a frightened mouse." Madison and Ashley flanked her on either side, forming a semicircle that trapped Maya against the lockers. Their positions were strategic, blocking any possible escape route while ensuring that Maya would be the center of attention for everyone in the hallway. The formation they created was practiced and deliberate, the result of weeks of experience in cornering and intimidating victims. Jessica stood directly in front of Maya, using her height advantage to loom over the smaller girl in a display of physical dominance. Madison positioned herself to Maya's left, cutting off access to the main corridor, while Ashley blocked the right side, preventing any escape toward the stairwell. The coordination spoke to the level of planning and forethought that went into their bullying campaign. "You know, girls," Jessica continued, pausing for dramatic effect and making sure she had everyone's attention, "I've been thinking about our quiet little friend here, and I've come to a conclusion." Her smile was cruel and calculating, the expression of someone who took genuine pleasure in the suffering of others. "I think Maya here is hiding something under all those baggy clothes. What do you think? Maybe she's not as innocent as she pretends to be." The suggestion was delivered with the kind of malicious innuendo that teenagers use to sexualize and humiliate their victims, turning normal adolescent self-consciousness about body image into a weapon. Jessica's implication was clear to everyone in the hallway, and Maya felt her face burn with shame as she realized that her tormentor was suggesting she was hiding something scandalous or inappropriate beneath her modest clothing. The crowd of students had grown larger now, forming a loose circle around the confrontation like spectators at a gladiatorial combat. Maya felt her heart pounding as she realized that Jessica was building up to something bigger than her usual verbal harassment. The anticipation in the air was palpable, electric with the kind of excitement that comes from watching someone else's humiliation. She clutched her books tighter and tried to step around the girls, but Madison moved to block her path while Ashley positioned herself on the other side. The hallway had become completely silent, except for the sound of Maya's rapid breathing and the occasional whisper from the watching students. Even the usual background noise of locker doors slamming and footsteps hurrying to class had faded away as everyone focused on the unfolding drama. The silence was oppressive and heavy, filled with the kind of tension that precedes violence or catastrophe. "I bet she's wearing something really embarrassing under that conservative outfit," Madison chimed in, her voice dripping with malicious glee. "Maybe we should help her show everyone what she's really like." Her freckled face was flushed with excitement, her green eyes bright with the prospect of taking their bullying to a new level. The suggestion was delivered with the kind of false concern that made it seem like they were doing Maya a favor by exposing her supposed hypocrisy. Ashley nodded enthusiastically, her brown hair bouncing as she practically vibrated with anticipation, her phone already in her hand as she prepared to document whatever was about to happen. The younger girl's desperation to prove herself to the older bullies had led her to increasingly extreme behavior, and she saw this moment as an opportunity to cement her place in Jessica's inner circle by capturing and sharing Maya's humiliation. "Yeah," Ashley added, her voice high with excitement. "I bet she's got some kinky underwear or something weird underneath all those boring clothes. Come on, Maya, don't be shy. We're all friends here." The false friendship in her tone was particularly cruel, using the language of inclusion and acceptance to mask the intent to humiliate and degrade. Maya's stomach dropped as she realized what they were planning, the full scope of their intended humiliation becoming clear. She took a step backward, only to feel the cold metal of the lockers against her back, the harsh surface pressing against her spine and eliminating any possibility of retreat. The trap was complete, the stage set for her public degradation. The realization that they intended to strip her in front of the entire school hit Maya like a physical blow, causing her breath to catch in her throat and her vision to blur momentarily. This wasn't just harassment anymore. This was sexual assault, a criminal act that would traumatize and humiliate her in ways that would follow her for the rest of her high school career and beyond. "Please," Maya whispered, her voice barely audible above the murmur of the crowd. "Just leave me alone." But her plea only seemed to encourage the girls, who exchanged knowing glances and stepped closer. The desperation in her voice was like music to their ears, confirmation that they had found her breaking point and were about to push her over the edge. The plea that escaped Maya's lips was filled with genuine terror and desperation, the sound of someone who had reached the absolute limit of their endurance, She had tried everything to avoid this confrontation, had swallowed her pride and absorbed months of harassment in an attempt to follow her uncle's teachings about peaceful resolution. But now, faced with the prospect of sexual humiliation in front of dozens of her peers, she realized that peaceful solutions were no longer possible. Jessica reached out and grabbed the waistband of Maya's jeans, her fingers finding the belt loops with practiced ease. "Come on, Maya," she said with a twisted smile, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "Don't be shy. Let's see what you're hiding under there." The threat was clear, the intention unmistakable, and Maya felt a surge of panic as she realized that Jessica actually intended to strip her in front of the entire school. The moment Jessica's hands made contact with Maya's clothing, the situation crossed a line from harassment into assault. The physical violation of grabbing her clothes with the intent to remove them was a criminal act that would have serious legal consequences if reported to authorities. But in the heat of the moment, with dozens of students watching and recording, Maya knew that her only options were to submit to the humiliation or fight back. The attack happened quickly, with the practiced efficiency of predators who had done this before. Jessica yanked hard on Maya's jeans, while Madison grabbed her arms to prevent her from protecting herself, her grip surprisingly strong for someone who appeared so slight. Ashley positioned herself to block any potential escape route, her phone already out and ready to record the humiliation for posterity and social media distribution. The coordination of the attack spoke to a level of planning and premeditation that made it clear this wasn't a spontaneous act of cruelty, but a carefully orchestrated assault designed to maximize Maya's humiliation and trauma. Jessica's grip on the waistband of Maya's jeans was firm and purposeful, while Madison's restraint of her arms prevented any possibility of self-defense. Ashley's positioning with the camera ready showed that they intended to document and share the assault, adding the element of permanent humiliation to the immediate trauma. Maya felt the fabric of her jeans strain and heard the sound of stitching beginning to tear as Jessica pulled with increasing force, her face twisted with effort and malicious joy. The sensation of her clothes being forcibly removed in front of dozens of her peers was devastating and violated every sense of dignity and personal autonomy she possessed. The sound of tearing fabric was like a gunshot in the silent hallway, making it clear to everyone present that this was no longer playful harassment, but serious assault. The watching students began to laugh and cheer, their phones appearing like magic as they anticipated capturing the moment for social media. The sound of their laughter was like a knife to Maya's heart, each cruel giggle a reminder of how alone she was in this moment. She could see the excitement in their eyes, the way they leaned forward to get a better view of her humiliation, and she realized that this was entertainment for them, a break from the monotony of their school day. The transformation of her peers into a mob of spectators hungry for her degradation was perhaps the most traumatic aspect of the entire experience. These were students she had sat next to in classes, people she had tried to befriend and connect with during her time at Riverside High School. But now they were revealed as nothing more than vultures, eager to feast on her suffering for their own amusement and social media content. But something snapped inside Maya in that moment, a dam bursting under the pressure of weeks of accumulated rage and humiliation. All the silent endurance, all the times she had walked away when she could have fought back, all the nights she had cried herself to sleep wondering why she had to be the target, suddenly crystallized into a white-hot fury that burned away her restraint like paper in a flame. The transformation was instantaneous and complete, like a switch being thrown in Maya's brain that activated 8 years of martial arts training and suppressed anger. The fear and helplessness that had paralyzed her for weeks vanished, replaced by a cold, calculating fury that saw her attackers not as people, but as threats to be neutralized. Every lesson her uncle had taught her about technique, strategy, and mental preparation suddenly came together in a moment of perfect clarity. She felt her uncle's training kick in, 8 years of discipline and technique flowing through her body like electricity, muscle memory taking over as her mind went cold and calculating. The meditation and mental conditioning that had seemed like abstract philosophy suddenly became intensely practical, allowing her to separate her emotions from her actions and respond with the kind of precision that years of training had made automatic. Her right hand shot out in a lightning-fast strike that caught Jessica directly in the solar plexus, the technique perfect in its execution and devastating in its effect. The strike was a classic karate technique known as a reverse punch, delivered with the full power of Maya's hips and shoulders rotating in perfect coordination. Her small fist, hardened by years of conditioning on heavy bags and wooden posts, struck with the force of a piston, driving deep into the soft tissue below Jessica's ribcage. Jessica's eyes went wide with shock and pain as the air rushed out of her lungs, her grip on Maya's jeans releasing instantly as she doubled over and gasped for breath. The sound she made was somewhere between a wheeze and a groan, a noise that cut through the laughter of the crowd and replaced it with stunned silence. The blow had struck the solar plexus, a nerve center that controlled breathing and could cause temporary paralysis of the diaphragm when struck properly. The effect on Jessica was immediate and dramatic, her face turning pale and then slightly blue as she struggled to draw breath. The popular girl who had seemed so powerful and in control just moments before was now bent over and gasping like a fish out of water, her perfect hair hanging in her face as she fought to regain the ability to breathe normally. Before Madison could react to what had happened, before she could even process that her friend had been hurt, Maya had twisted out of her grasp with a fluid motion that would have impressed her uncle. Her elbow came up and around in a sharp arc that connected with Madison's ribs, the impact precise and calculated to cause maximum pain without permanent damage. The elbow strike was a Muay Thai technique that Maya had practiced thousands of times on heavy bags and training partners. The bone of her elbow, one of the hardest surfaces on the human body, struck Madison's floating ribs with surgical precision. The blow was designed to cause intense pain and temporary incapacitation without risking serious injury like a broken rib or damaged organ. Madison stumbled backward, her face white with shock and pain, her hands clutching her side as she tried to understand what had just happened. The freckled girl who had been so confident in her ability to restrain the smaller student was now struggling to remain upright, her face twisted with pain and confusion as she tried to process how the situation had reversed so quickly. The crowd fell silent as Maya straightened up, her entire demeanor transformed in the space of seconds. The shy, frightened girl who had been their victim just moments before had vanished, replaced by someone who moved with the controlled grace of a trained fighter. Her stance was balanced and ready, her eyes alert and focused, her breathing steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. The transformation was so complete and sudden that many of the watching students initially didn't understand what they were seeing. The quiet new girl, who had been the target of harassment for weeks, had suddenly become something else entirely, someone who moved with lethal grace and possessed skills that none of them had imagined. The phones that had been raised to record her humiliation now captured something entirely different, the emergence of a warrior who had been hiding in plain sight. Ashley, who had been so confident moments before, now took a step back as she saw the change in Maya's eyes, the cold calculation that had replaced the fear. The younger girl's bravado evaporated instantly when confronted with the reality of someone who actually knew how to fight, her phone trembling in her hand as she realized that the situation had spiraled completely out of control. "You want to see what I'm hiding?" Maya said, her voice steady and dangerous, carrying across the silent hallway with the authority of someone who had found her power. "Let me show you." The words were delivered with a calm confidence that was somehow more terrifying than any scream or threat could have been. Maya's voice carried the weight of years of training and the absolute certainty of someone who knew exactly what she was capable of. The quiet girl who had endured weeks of harassment without fighting back was gone, replaced by someone who would never again allow herself to be victimized. What followed was a masterclass in controlled violence, a demonstration of skill and technique that left no doubt about Maya's capabilities. She moved with the precision of someone who had spent years perfecting her craft, each strike calculated for maximum effect without causing permanent damage. Her uncle had taught her well, and every lesson, every hour of training, every bruise and sore muscle from years of practice all came together in this moment of perfect execution. Jessica, still gasping for breath, tried to straighten up and regain her composure, but Maya was already moving. A perfectly executed leg sweep sent Jessica crashing to the floor, her long legs tangling as she fell hard on her back, her blonde hair spreading across the linoleum like a golden fan. The impact drove the remaining air from her lungs, leaving her stunned and helpless as she stared up at the ceiling lights in shock. The leg sweep was a technique from judo that Maya had practiced countless times in her uncle's gym. The movement was simple in concept, but required perfect timing and positioning to execute properly. Maya's right leg hooked behind Jessica's left ankle, while her hands pushed the taller girl's shoulders backward, using leverage and gravity to send her opponent crashing to the ground with devastating effect. Jessica hit the floor with a sound that echoed through the silent hallway, her head narrowly missing the metal base of a nearby locker. The impact was jarring and disorienting, leaving her staring up at the fluorescent lights in confusion and pain. The confident bully who had initiated the assault was now lying on her back, helpless and humiliated in front of the same crowd that had gathered to watch Maya's degradation. Madison, still clutching her ribs, tried to grab Maya from behind, thinking she could use her size advantage to overpower the smaller girl. But Maya had anticipated the move, her training allowing her to sense the attack before it came. She pivoted on her heel, grabbed Madison's arm, and used the redhead's own momentum against her in a perfect judo throw that sent her flying over Maya's shoulder. The throw was a classic technique called an ippon seoi nage, or one-armed shoulder throw, that used the attacker's forward momentum to devastating effect. Maya ducked under Madison's grabbing attempt, positioned her shoulder against the redhead's midsection, and used her hips as a fulcrum to launch the larger girl through the air. The technique required perfect timing and positioning, but when executed properly, it could send opponents much larger than oneself flying with spectacular results. Madison hit the floor hard, her body making a satisfying thud as she landed in a heap next to her friend. The wind was knocked out of her lungs, and she lay there gasping and groaning, her freckled face twisted with pain and confusion. The girl, who had been so eager to participate in Maya's humiliation, was now sprawled on the hallway floor, her confidence and cruelty replaced by shock and pain. Ashley, seeing her two companions on the floor, attempted to run, her nerve finally breaking as she realized that this was not going according to plan. But Maya was faster, her hand shooting out to catch Ashley's ankle in a grip that felt like steel. A simple twist and pull brought Ashley down hard, her phone skittering across the floor as she joined her friends in their undignified sprawl on the hallway linoleum. The ankle pick was a wrestling technique that Maya had learned during her cross-training sessions at her uncle's gym. The movement was simple but effective, using leverage and timing to bring down an opponent who was trying to escape. Ashley's momentum carried her forward even as Maya's grip on her ankle prevented her from taking another step, resulting in a painful fall that sent her crashing face first toward the floor. Ashley managed to get her hands up to break her fall, but the impact was still jarring and humiliating. Her phone, which had been ready to record Maya's degradation, went sliding across the polished linoleum floor, coming to rest against the far wall with a crack that suggested the screen had been damaged. The girl who had been so eager to document and share Maya's humiliation was now sprawled on the floor herself, her carefully maintained image of cool cruelty replaced by the reality of pain and defeat. The entire confrontation lasted less than 30 seconds, but in that time, Maya had completely reversed the power dynamic that had defined her experience at Riverside High School. The three girls who had terrorized her for weeks, who had made her life a living hell, now lay on the floor in various states of pain and humiliation, while Maya stood over them with barely a hair out of place. Her breathing was steady, her stance relaxed but ready, and there was a calmness about her that spoke of complete control. The transformation was so complete that many of the watching students were still trying to process what they had witnessed. The quiet new girl who had been their victim had revealed herself to be something entirely different, someone with skills and capabilities that none of them had imagined. The crowd of students stared in shock, their phones forgotten as they tried to process what they had just witnessed. The quiet new girl, the one they had dismissed as weak and pathetic, had just demolished three of the school's most notorious bullies with an efficiency that was both terrifying and impressive. The silence was deafening, broken only by the sound of Jessica's labored breathing and Madison's quiet whimpers of pain. Many of the students who had been laughing and cheering just moments before now looked uncomfortable and ashamed, realizing that they had been complicit in an assault that had backfired spectacularly. The phones that had been raised to capture Maya's humiliation now held evidence of something entirely different, a clear case of self-defense against sexual assault that would exonerate Maya and incriminate her attackers. "Let me make something very clear," Maya said, her voice carrying to every corner of the silent hallway with the authority of someone who had found her power and was not afraid to use it. "I never wanted to hurt anyone. I just wanted to be left alone to get my education and live my life in peace, but you three decided that wasn't going to happen." Her words were delivered with a calm authority that commanded attention and respect. The tremor of fear that had characterized her voice for weeks was gone, replaced by the steady confidence of someone who had discovered their own strength and was not afraid to use it when necessary. She looked down at Jessica, who was still gasping for breath on the floor, her face red with exertion and humiliation. "You decided that I was weak, that I was an easy target, that I would just take whatever you dished out." The words were delivered without anger or malice, simply stating facts that everyone present could verify. "You were wrong," Maya continued, her gaze sweeping across the three girls on the floor and then to the crowd of students who had gathered to watch her humiliation. "I've spent 8 years learning how to defend myself, hoping I would never have to use those skills. But when you decided to assault me, to try to strip my clothes off in front of everyone, you left me no choice." The explanation served both as a justification for her actions and a warning to anyone else who might consider targeting her in the future. Maya's voice carried the weight of years of training and the absolute certainty of someone who would never again allow herself to be victimized. "I could have seriously hurt you," she said, looking directly at Jessica, who was slowly beginning to recover her breath. "But I chose not to. I used only the minimum force necessary to stop your attack and protect myself. But if anyone here thinks they want to test me again, if anyone thinks they want to try what these three just tried, I promise you that the outcome will be the same." The threat was delivered without malice or anger, simply as a statement of fact that everyone present understood completely. Maya had demonstrated her capabilities beyond any doubt, and her promise of similar consequences for future attackers carried the weight of absolute certainty. As Maya spoke, teachers and administrators began arriving at the scene, drawn by reports of a disturbance in the hallway. Principal Henderson, a tall man with graying hair and a reputation for fairness, pushed through the crowd of students to assess the situation. The sight that greeted him was dramatic and clear. Three students on the floor in obvious pain, one student standing calmly nearby, and dozens of witnesses with phones documenting the entire incident. The aftermath of the confrontation spread through Riverside High School like wildfire, carried by social media and word of mouth with the speed that only teenage gossip can achieve. Within hours, everyone knew about the quiet new girl who had taken down three of the school's most notorious bullies in a matter of seconds. The video footage that several students had captured showed Maya's incredible skills in stunning detail, and word quickly spread about her martial arts background and the systematic bullying that had led to the confrontation. The videos that circulated on social media platforms painted a clear picture of what had occurred, showing Jessica's initial assault on Maya and the swift, decisive response that followed. The footage became a sensation not just within the school, but across the broader community, with many viewers expressing admiration for Maya's skills and outrage at the bullying she had endured. Teachers who had previously overlooked the bullying situation, who had dismissed Maya's quiet demeanor as simple shyness, suddenly took notice of what had been happening under their noses. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable, with multiple witnesses and video documentation providing a complete picture of the systematic harassment that Maya had endured. Mrs. Peterson, Maya's English teacher, felt particularly guilty when she realized how she had misinterpreted Maya's withdrawn behavior in class. The teacher had attributed Maya's reluctance to participate in discussions to shyness or disinterest, never recognizing the signs of someone who was being systematically victimized by her classmates. Principal Henderson, a tall man with graying hair and a reputation for fairness, called Maya into his office for a lengthy discussion about the incident. The conversation lasted over an hour, with Maya explaining her side of the story calmly and honestly, describing months of harassment and the final assault that had triggered her response. The principal's office was a comfortable space with warm wood paneling and educational posters that was designed to put students at ease during difficult conversations. Henderson had decades of experience dealing with teenage conflicts and violence, but the case presented by Maya was unlike anything he had encountered before. The combination of systematic bullying, clear self-defense, and the extraordinary skills displayed by Maya created a complex situation that required careful consideration. Maya showed the principal the torn fabric of her jeans as evidence of what Jessica had attempted to do, and several witnesses came forward to corroborate her account of the systematic bullying she had endured. Students who had previously been too afraid to speak up now found their voices, telling Principal Henderson about the months of harassment they had witnessed. The witness statements painted a disturbing picture of systematic psychological torture that had been occurring under the noses of teachers and administrators. Students described incidents they had witnessed in hallways, the cafeteria, and the gym, providing a comprehensive timeline of harassment that made it clear Maya had been targeted for sustained abuse. The picture that emerged was one of sustained psychological torture, deliberate and calculated cruelty that had been allowed to continue because no one had the courage to intervene. The bystander effect had been in full display for months, with dozens of students witnessing harassment but failing to report it or intervene due to fear of becoming targets themselves. While the principal was obligated to suspend all 4 students involved in the physical confrontation, Maya's suspension was reduced to a single day after the full scope of the bullying became clear. The decision was made in consultation with the school district's legal counsel, who recognized that Maya's actions clearly constituted self-defense against sexual assault. Jessica, Madison, and Ashley each received a week-long suspension and mandatory counseling, along with a formal reprimand that would remain on their permanent records. The school also implemented new policies regarding bullying and harassment, with stricter consequences for those who engaged in such behavior and better training for teachers to recognize the signs of systematic harassment. The legal implications of the incident were significant, with the video evidence clearly showing an attempted sexual assault followed by legitimate self-defense. District attorneys reviewed the footage and witness statements, but declined to press charges against Maya, while leaving open the possibility of charges against her attackers if Maya chose to pursue them. The change in Maya's status at school was immediate and dramatic, like stepping from shadow into sunlight. Students who had previously ignored her now approached her with respect and curiosity, wanting to know more about the quiet girl who had such incredible skills. The transformation was so complete that it seemed like she was attending a different school entirely. The martial arts club, which had been struggling for membership and barely maintaining its existence, suddenly found itself with a waiting list after Maya agreed to join and help with training. Her expertise and patient teaching style quickly made her one of the most popular students in the school, with students eager to learn from someone who had demonstrated such impressive abilities. Teachers began to see her as a leader rather than a victim, and she found herself invited to participate in school activities that had previously been closed to her. The debate team recruited her for her calm demeanor and analytical mind, recognizing qualities that had been hidden beneath her previous victimization but were now clearly visible. The student council asked her to serve on the anti-bullying committee, valuing her unique perspective as someone who had experienced systematic harassment but had found the strength to overcome it. Her insights into the psychology of bullying and the failures of adult intervention proved invaluable in developing new policies and procedures. Even the volleyball team expressed interest in her athletic abilities, with Coach Patterson finally recognizing the natural coordination and reflexes that Maya had displayed during PE classes. The coach realized that many of the accidents involving Maya had actually demonstrated her ability to absorb impacts and maintain her balance under difficult circumstances. Maya discovered that she had a talent for leadership and a natural ability to help others find their confidence. Students who had been victims of bullying themselves began to seek her out for advice and support, finding in her someone who truly understood their experiences and could offer practical guidance for dealing with harassment. The anti-bullying committee that Maya joined became one of the most effective student organizations in the school's history, with her experiences providing valuable insights into how harassment typically develops and escalates. Her recommendations for intervention strategies and support systems were implemented school-wide and became a model for other institutions in the district. But perhaps the most significant change was in Maya herself. The confrontation had forced her to find a balance between her uncle's teachings about restraint and the necessity of standing up for herself. She had learned that sometimes, despite our best intentions to avoid conflict, we must be willing to fight for our dignity and safety. The internal transformation was as dramatic as the external changes in her circumstances. Maya had discovered that there was a difference between seeking peace and allowing yourself to be destroyed, between avoiding conflict and becoming a victim. The balance between these concepts became central to her new understanding of strength and self-respect. The experience had taught her that there was a difference between being a victim and being at peace, between avoiding conflict and allowing yourself to be destroyed by it. She had found the balance between passive resistance and active self-defense, understanding that true strength sometimes required the willingness to use force when all other options had been exhausted. Her uncle, when he learned about the incident through a phone call from Maya's parents, was proud of how she had handled herself. During their conversation, he noted that she had used only the minimum force necessary to stop the attack and had shown remarkable control under pressure. The fact that none of her attackers had been seriously injured despite her capabilities demonstrated the kind of restraint and judgment he had worked for years to instill in her. He reminded her that true martial artists never seek out fights, but they also never allow themselves to be victims when they have the power to protect themselves. The balance between these two principles was the mark of a true warrior, and Maya had found that balance in the most challenging circumstances imaginable. "You did exactly what I taught you," Ricardo told her during their phone conversation, his voice filled with pride and approval. "You tried everything else first. You endured harassment and looked for peaceful solutions. But when they escalated to physical assault, when they tried to sexually humiliate you in public, you defended yourself with exactly the amount of force necessary to stop the attack." That's what martial arts is really about. Not the ability to hurt others, but the wisdom to know when and how to protect yourself. Jessica, Madison, and Ashley returned to school changed as well, their week-long suspension having given them time to reflect on their actions and their consequences. The humiliation of being defeated so decisively by someone they had considered weak had shaken their confidence and forced them to re-evaluate their behavior. The social media attention surrounding the incident had not been kind to the three bullies, with many viewers expressing outrage at their behavior and admiration for Maya's response. The video footage made it impossible for them to claim innocence or portray themselves as victims, forcing them to confront the reality of their actions and their consequences. They found that their previous social status had been damaged by the incident, with many students viewing them as cowards who had picked on someone smaller and weaker than themselves. The revelation that Maya had been enduring systematic harassment for months while possessing the ability to end it at any time made their behavior seem even more cowardly and despicable. Jessica, in particular, seemed to have learned a valuable lesson about the consequences of bullying. The girl who had once ruled the school's social scene with an iron fist now found herself isolated and alone, her former friends having distanced themselves from her after the incident. The experience of being on the receiving end of judgment and ostracism gave her a taste of what her victims had endured. She approached Maya during lunch one day, her usual arrogance replaced by something that resembled genuine remorse. The cafeteria fell silent as students noticed the former Queen Bee approaching her former victim, everyone curious to see how this encounter would play out. "I wanted to apologize," Jessica said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper as she stood beside Maya's table in the cafeteria. "What we did to you was wrong, and you had every right to defend yourself. I know it doesn't excuse anything, but I hope you can forgive us someday." The apology was delivered with what appeared to be genuine remorse, though Maya recognized that it might have been motivated as much by social pressure and consequences as by actual understanding. Still, the willingness to approach her publicly and acknowledge wrongdoing represented a significant change from the arrogant bully who had terrorized her for months. Maya looked at her former tormentor for a long moment, studying the genuine regret in her eyes before nodding slowly. "I forgive you," she said simply, "but I won't forget. And I hope you won't either." The response was measured and mature, offering redemption while maintaining appropriate boundaries and expectations. The forgiveness Maya offered was not naive or unconditional, but rather the kind of mature response that demonstrated her growth and understanding. She recognized that holding on to anger and resentment would only harm herself, while also making it clear that forgiveness did not mean forgetting or accepting future mistreatment. The incident at Riverside High School became a turning point not just for Maya, but for the entire school culture. Teachers began to take bullying reports more seriously, implementing new protocols for investigating and addressing harassment. Students became more aware of the impact their actions could have on others, and many began to speak up when they witnessed bullying rather than simply standing by and watching. The new policies implemented by the school district included mandatory training for all staff on recognizing signs of bullying and harassment, clear procedures for investigating complaints, and serious consequences for students found guilty of systematic harassment. The changes were comprehensive and represented a fundamental shift in how the institution approached student safety and well-being. The story of Maya's confrontation with her bullies spread beyond Riverside High School, becoming a cautionary tale shared in anti-bullying presentations and discussed in educational conferences across the region. The video footage became a powerful tool for demonstrating both the reality of teenage harassment and the importance of empowering victims to defend themselves. As Maya walked through the halls of Riverside High School in the weeks that followed, she carried herself differently. The shy, frightened girl who had once tried to blend into the background had been replaced by someone who understood her own strength and wasn't afraid to use it when necessary. She had learned that sometimes the greatest victory comes not from avoiding conflict, but from standing up for yourself when you have no other choice. The transformation was visible in every aspect of her demeanor, from the confident way she held her head high to the steady, measured pace of her walk through the hallways. Students who had never noticed her before now nodded respectfully as she passed, while those who had witnessed her confrontation with the bullies looked at her with a mixture of admiration and healthy respect. The quiet girl who had once been an easy target had become a force to be reckoned with, and everyone at Riverside High School knew it. But more importantly, Maya had learned that true strength comes not from the ability to hurt others, but from the wisdom to know when and how to protect yourself. She had faced her bullies and emerged victorious, not through revenge or cruelty, but through the simple act of refusing to be a victim any longer. Her story became an inspiration to other students who had been suffering in silence, showing them that it was possible to stand up to bullies and reclaim their dignity. The anti-bullying committee she served on received numerous reports from students who had previously been too afraid to speak up, leading to interventions that protected other potential victims from similar harassment. Maya's transformation from victim to victor represented more than just a personal triumph. It became a symbol of the power that comes from refusing to accept mistreatment and the importance of standing up for oneself when all other options have been exhausted. Her story proved that sometimes the quietest people possess the greatest strength, and that true power comes not from the ability to dominate others, but from the wisdom to protect oneself and others when protection is needed most. The lessons learned from Maya's experience extended far beyond the walls of Riverside High School, serving as a reminder that everyone deserves to be treated with dignity and respect, and that sometimes the most important battles are fought not by warriors seeking glory, but by ordinary people who simply refuse to be victims any longer.